All right, all right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. We are your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. And wow, did we kind of have a little of all of that? A lot of the wacky. A lot of the wacky on UFC 303. Not as much of the wonderful, but a lot of the wacky. Um, yeah, a lot of that. I'm Robert Winfrey, anyway, and I am your host. So thank you all very much for tuning in. Anything you can do to help the episode or the show in general, like, comment, star rating, written review, whatever's applicable to your podcast platform of choice. And I know there's a few different platforms, so give any of whatever they want you to do if you could do that. If you could share, let people know about the show. That's always in your real life or digitally. If you got a social media platform you prefer, let people know about it. That's always appreciated. And if you can't do any of that, have already done all of that, and you're just listening, thank you for that. Just any and all of it is deeply, deeply appreciated. All right, on the agenda this evening, last night, UFC 303. What a cursed event. What a cursed event. Um, we'll talk about it, but um, yeah, they had to change the co-main event like 4 hours before that fight took place. They were on air when they announced the change. Wild. We'll talk about it. We will absolutely talk about that. A lot of stuff. Then there's no UFC event this coming Saturday. They are taking the week of the 4th of July off. Fair enough. But there is some stuff to talk about. We have a few pieces of news, some fight announcements, some fight changes. The UFC has had some bad luck recently. Um, Look, they couldn't get the UFC 300 that they wanted, but what they wound up giving us in practice was pretty darn good. And ever since, things have been just. It's not disaster after disaster. That would be an overstatement, but it's been hard going. I mean, losing Connor a couple of weeks before 303, you could argue that's fairly disastrous. It's why I maintain it's why they didn't announce he was out because they needed to have a replacement at least. And even then, if you bought tickets for that event, then when they changed the main event, didn't get a refund and then rebuy, you cost yourself money because what they were selling those tickets for after Connor fell out is not what they were selling them for with Connor as the headliner. That shouldn't be, which is fine, but a thing you should have looked into, potentially. So we'll talk about some of the fights that have been made, some of the fights that have fallen out, that whole deal. And yeah, just whatever other news has kind of come across my feed in life during this last week. So I think that's it for the preamble. Once again, thank you very much for listening. And let's dive into this, shall we? All right, UFC 303. They were at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. We have a few figures here for this one that were released. They had an attendance of just under 19,000, 18,881. Total of $15 million. That was going to be higher. If Connor had stayed in, that was going to be 20. So they were that's still good for the record, but that's not what it was going to be with Connor. Just as a matter of me saying the truth there. That's still a very good number. Okay, we start with the predictions. How did the predictions go? I only changed my mind on one fight. I changed my mind on the first fight of the night, Ricky Simone and Vinicius Oliveira. Something about when they squared up at I think it was at the ceremonial weigh-ins. There was a size difference, and I was reminded that Ricky Simone is profoundly hot and cold. he's not the oldest guy in the world, but he's had some real struggles. And this fight, he just couldn't get out of first gear. I mean, we'll talk about it when we get to it, but it's the only one I changed my mind on. And then I had to re-choose the co-main event. Originally, I'd gone with Brian Ortega. May as well talk about this for the sake of talking about it. I'd originally leaned Brian Ortega just a little bit. I'd given myself an asterisk for that one. Wanted to do some tape study. Was still like ever so slightly Ortega, which I knew was like, he's still the underdog, and I get why he's the underdog, but just a little bit. Then, day before weigh-ins, they announced that Ortega's having some weight cutting issues. Something's wrong. So that fight has to be fought at 155. Now, because there was a weight issue, that means I could have changed it anyway, but I really had another out there. Then I saw Ortega on the scale. Now, he didn't look... I've seen guys who have had really bad weight cuts, and he didn't look like a guy who had a bad weight cut. No surprise, he's fighting 10 pounds heavier than he was originally planning to. But he did not look well. He just did not look very healthy, which is not uncommon for people weighing in, but when you factor in bumping that up, just felt weird. Something was a little bit off. Diego Lopez actually got woken up at like 4 in the morning, went to bed weighing 146, so if he had any cutting to do after he woke up, would have been very minimal. You don't usually gain weight during the course of sleeping. Especially when you're cutting weight. It's not impossible to go to bed at something and wake up a little heavier, but if you go to bed the night before on weight, we're talking at most a pound the next day. As a general rule. There's obviously some people who are going to be different with that. So he didn't have to rehydrate thoroughly. 146 is technically lightweight. But he rehydrated, weighed in, and so now we're up at lightweight. And the bump up in weight actually meant I was still going to sit on Ortega. If it was just a scummy tactic, then okay, like that's a scummy tactic and call it that, but that is frequently a successful tactic. So then, partway through the broadcast, you start hearing rumblings. I think Luke Thomas first tweeted something about it. Ariel Helwani wound up. Several people, Shaquille Majori, all said, hey, something's going on. And a lot of people started saying, hey, Ortega's out. And they found a guy on 4 hours' notice. So apparently Ortega's been dealing with some kind of physical illness. Not an injury, but he was running a fever of 103 degrees, which is not good. And just had a few other things going, like just medically was not advisable. Had to pull out. That's why they had to bump the weight up, because if you're sick and cutting weight, that's real bad. So that wound up just getting... So he had to pull out. Unfortunate. Apparently he was fighting that when, whatever this is, he was fighting some kind of illness when he signed for this fight, because this fight came together. Remember, this was not the original co-main event. That and the main event for the light heavyweight title both came together late after Conor pulled out. So I don't know if he thought he'd be better in time. I don't know. But he wound up pulling out in steps from around the corner, getting a massage. Not even joking about that. Dan Ige. So they reweigh Diego Lopez. He weighs 161. Ige comes in and weighs 165. Fine, catch weight, 165. And that becomes our new co-main event. which means I had to pick that one, and I picked Lopez. Like, that shouldn't be a shock to anyone. Um, Anybody coming in on that short a notice, there's very few people I would pick to beat Diego Lopez anyway. There's almost no one I'd pick to do it coming off the couch. Now, that's not exactly off the couch. Ige was already in camp. He had a fight coming up. He was supposed to fight in a couple of weeks, right? Hang on, because Ige was supposed to fight. Was he on the Namajunas? No, it's Namajunas and Cortez. I don't think it was that one. I think it was the next Apex card on July 20th. Yeah, he was supposed to fight Chepe Mariscal on the July 20th card. That was originally supposed to be Dan Ige and Joe Anderson Brito. That's a good fight. Yeah, so that fight's off, obviously, for the 20th. But yeah, picked Lopez, and we'll get to that fight when we get to it. What did I get wrong here? Let's see. Chasson and Buena Silva. Got that one wrong. Cut stoppage. Again, we'll get to that fight. Not that Buena Silva wasn't kind of fading anyway. Like, Chasson might have been figuring some stuff out. But unfortunate in that, Buena Silva could absolutely have won that fight. But you get cut bad enough, you got to stop it. I'm not out here complaining. And I was a little speculative picking Michael Page over Ian Gary. Gary got the win, so I got that one wrong. We'll talk about that. Let's see. I picked Swanson. I thought he beat Feely. Feely got a split decision. I thought Swanson won that one. Let's see. What was the? I think there's one more. Silva and Jordan. I picked Jordan. I shouldn't have. That one bothered me. Silva missed weight. I had an out. I should have taken it. I should have known better. Should have known better on that one. But lesson learned. And we'll get to that when we get to it again. Lopez and Ortega didn't happen. That fizzled. Anything else? I did not ultimately change my pick from Badai to Arlovsky. Yeah, I think that's it. So ultimately 9-4 on the evening. So if you're about to call BS on me changing my pick on the first fight of the night, I would have been 8-5 instead of 9-4. It changes almost nothing mathematically for how I've been doing. So 9-4. Year to date, 184 and 84. Did I math that properly? I might have to double check. I'll do that later. I might have to double check that one. But anyway, 184 and 84 on the year. With 3 no contests, now there are 3 fights that wound up fizzling. More or less okay with this. More or less okay. All right. As for the fights themselves, let's be honest, not a great card. Just, I'm about to talk about the best thing on this card. Okay, I really am. And I wish to make it abundantly clear that the things I have to say about this fight, I'm going to wind up talking about the rest of this card. And you might look at some of these results and go, wow, there were some finishes. Yes, there were. But this was top to bottom. This was not a very good card. Oh, by the way, as a minor note, Some people joked about trying to get, a $303,000 bonus because it's UFC 303. That didn't happen. Apparently, Dana White said there were two Fight of the Night bonuses available. Did not give out two Fight of the Night bonuses, so which really did. I think that was really unfair to. Um, really unfair is a bit of a stretch. I would have thrown a fight if you have like a one if you have two bonuses for that. I don't disagree with who they gave Fight of the Night to, and we'll get to that fight. I would have thrown the second one to Ray Saruya and Carlos Hernandez. I thought that was a lot of fun, but I'm me and I like grappling, and Dana might have not even been in the building for that one, so who knows. Okay. Main event of a. By the time we got to this fight, we were kind of desperate. Like this had not been a great, especially the pay-per-view card, had not been great to this point. But main event, Alex Pereira defeats Yuri Prochazka via TKO, head kick and punches, 13 seconds of round two. I mean, what do you even say about this? I mean, you're listening, so I have to say something. Pereira just had his number. In their first fight, you can look up the statistics on this. In their first fight, Prochazka was credited with landing, I think, 30, either significant or total, I think significant, 30 significant strikes. Which, for a guy who got stopped in the second, and he won the first round, I think, by most reckonings, that's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong at all. He's credited with landing 7 in this fight. Pereira just had him. Calf kicked him out of both stances. Showed a lot more of his left kick. It's not that he never kicks with his left leg, Pereira, but he doesn't do it a whole lot. It's more either probing with the calf kick, maybe throwing it up to the head a little bit, jabbing the body, and setting up the left hook. That's somewhat grossly oversimplifying a very complicated man's striking paradigm and strategy. But if you had to boil it down to a really digestible understanding, that's kind of it. Now, there's some variance in there, and clearly he's more dynamic than that would lead you to believe. If all I did was say that's what he does, that's not all he does. But he does a lot of calf kicking, good forward pressure, good body jabs. Occasionally he'll keep you honest with a right high kick. He might throw the left inside leg kick on occasion, but it's not a big weapon for him. In general. And left body jab to set up the left hook, because his left body jab sucks. I mean, it sucks to get hit, but I don't mean he does it poorly. Clearly he doesn't. But if you've never walked into somebody's body jab, when they're really like, either trying to drive a railroad spike or sticking a telephone pole out in front of you or whatever sort of metaphor you want to use, and I've heard several, including those two. That's a good distance maintainer, actually. Somebody tries to close distance on you, you stick your arm out there, and there's force behind it, and then you resist at the end. You're not just touching. Boom. You can stop somebody, or it's harder for them to come forward, and then hands start coming down, and the body jab sets up 2 punches very well, both of which are devastating. It'll set up the left hook, which is what Pereira uses it for most of the time. Excuse me, Pereira. Let Joe Rogan's H in there, and it shouldn't be. It's not where it should be. But the left hook, because the hands drop to worry about that, and dropping the shoulder kind of loads it so you can come up and around with the hook. Or Junior Dos Santos loved the body jab because it set up his right overhand. You throw the jab to the body, not only do the hands start dropping, but that's the same shoulder motion that gets your right overhand going. So you throw that a few times, and then when they see your shoulders dip like that's what's coming, come with the right overhand, and you can knock somebody's block off. So Pereira Pereira. Yeah, jeez. I'm tired. Forgive me. Pereira got a very good body jab. Catches. He caught Yuri at the very end of the first round with a left hook that sat him down. Prochazka just sort of blitzing, kind of trying to do anything. Pereira keeps his hands kind of where he always does and steps back, steps off angle, and just left hook. It's not the prettiest left hook he's ever thrown or landed, but that man's ability to generate power is absurd. I mean, we're not talking like Francis Ngannou, I touch you with whatever I want twice and you die. But Pereira is never out of position. Now, that can make you a little predictable, and that's what's gotten him caught in a few other fights. It's not like Yuri never caught him in their first fight. It's kind of how Izzy got to him, and I mean, in all of their fights. Their first kickboxing fight, Izzy probably should have won. Second one, Izzy dropped a 10-8 on Pereira before getting caught with the left hook in the second round. Their first MMA fight, Izzy had a fair amount of success. Because he's always in position, that does make, if you know where someone's going to be, even if it's where they're supposed to be, you can try and make something out of that. It's not always easy, especially if they're where they're supposed to be, but it can be done. Here, very textbook stuff. Just absurd power generation. He wasn't even planted when that punch landed. Like, that was not the best left hook in the world. But Prochazka, when he came forward, he doesn't fight with his hands up most of the time, does Prochazka. And you could have... So, there's a thing here. You can't be saved by the bell. If you're unconscious at the end of the round, fight's over. I talked about this when discussing the fight between Zhang Weili and Yan Xiaonan. Because at the end of, I think it was the second, Zhang puts her unconscious with a choke. And because Yan just isn't tapping. I think it's a rear naked choke. Chokes in, Yan's not going to tap, so Zhang puts her to sleep. Round ends. She releases the choke, and Yan's able to just do enough of a no-sell to get the referee, but she's clearly unconscious. That fight should have been over. Really. Here, if Yuri's too hurt by what happened at the end of that round to continue, the fight would be over. Now, Yuri gets up on his own, which is important, you have to. Then he's clearly wobbled, but I guess the referee, and we'll talk about the end of this in a minute, it was Herb Dean, and not one of Herb Dean's finer performances. I know that it's unfair to come out here and only criticize the referees. We all need to do a better job about giving them praise when they do it right. I try to. I'm not the best at it, but I try. Because if all you ever hear about is when you screw up, that's really demoralizing and it can breed a lot of bitterness. And refereeing is a very difficult job. I am not going to sit here and say Herb Dean is a terrible ref. Because I don't think he's terrible. I don't think he's operating at the... There was a time when you could argue, I think very persuasively, he was the best referee in the sport. I don't think he's the best referee in the sport at this point, but I don't think he's a bad referee. And I want to make sure that's clear. So he saw whatever it was enough not to stop the fight based on how that round ended. Because Yuri was able to get up under his own power. Fair enough. Prochazka's corner probably should have not let him go out there for the second. Corners stopping fights in MMA is so comically rare that you know it's never going to happen. But they really should have. They really should not have allowed that. Because what happened? You send him back out there, and in 13 seconds, he gets kicked in the head in 10 seconds. Pereira, for a man his size, he takes the smallest switch imaginable. It's not just lift the lead leg and throw it up. That's very difficult for anybody that size. I can't do it. My hips are messed up. But I have to take kind of a bigger switch or like a full-on step up, depending on how high I want to kick. Working on that, personally. But he takes this really small switch step, and then his left leg comes up and just boom to the side of Prochka's head, drops him. Should have been over there. Gets on top, starts punching, and about 8 punches later, the referee finally intervenes. Again, this was not a great. This was a late stoppage from Herb Dean in this instance. And there's some bits during the finishing sequence where he's trying to get around for a better look at how the punches are landing, and I don't know if this was just a comedy of errors where he's trying to get around the same way that Pereira is stepping, but he can never quite get there. And just unfortunate. As far as as far as how that played out. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about Pereira at this point. I'm going to say a few things, so I'm going to try not to wax too poetic here, but there's also not a lot about the rest of this card I feel compelled to talk about. So if I spend the lion's share of my time on this, hope you'll just bear with me. Pereira has not been in the UFC that long, people. First of all, he's 36. He'll be 37 first week of July. So literally a week from now, as I record this, in 7 days. It's July 7th. So 37 years old, basically, getting better in one of the most complicated sports in the world. MMA is also very unforgiving, especially at the UFC level. If there are problems with your game, he is going. You are going to get punished. Look at how many talented guys got to the UFC, but as soon as somebody realized, oh, X and Y, and you fall apart, or you're not very good there, it will just, it is brutal in that respect, and very, very unforgiving. He's still getting better. He's doing some of this, and he mentioned he fought the last time. He fought Jamal Hill, I think he said, with a broken toe. Seems like he messed something up in this fight, too. Like, he was messing around with his feet after the fight. So hopefully nothing too serious there. But he came into the UFC in November of 21. We're not even 3 years. We're 2.5. In 2.5 years, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-1 in 2.5 years. Two-weight world champion. Now becomes the first guy to record more than one defense of this belt since John Jones gave it up in 2020. Because Jan Blachowicz had one. He beat Dominic Reyes for the belt. Then beat Adesanya to retain it. Then lost to Glover. Glover lost to Yuri. Yuri got injured. Jamal Hill beat Glover. Then Jamal Hill got injured. Then Pereira won it. And now he's beaten both Jamal Hill and Yuri Prochazka. he's he went 1-1 with Adesanya at middleweight. Um, has his fairly decorated glory kickboxing background. It's almost not impossible. It's very difficult to parse out Pereira's career trajectory. This dude's like a shooting star. Comes in late in his combat sports development with a boatload of miles already on him from all of his kickboxing and doing some boxing too. Just tons of miles on him. Comes to the UFC and in short order becomes champion. Somewhat, look, did he have an easier path to the belt than others? Yes, he did. He was match made not easily, but somewhat favorably because he had history with the champion, and the champion had beaten everybody in the weight class twice over. So, was there a little bit of preferential stuff going on there? Sure. But it was also understandable. It wasn't out of the blue. And then beats Adesanya again, then gets knocked out, then gets right back on the horse like nothing happened almost. Moves up in weight, goes close-ish fight with Blachowicz, their fight, but Blachowicz faded badly down the stretch. Then becomes champion, beats the former champion, then knocks out the other former champion, then rematches the guy he beat to claim the vacant belt and makes it look easier. Now he's saying, I think I might want to try my hand at heavyweight. And guys, I gotta be honest. You can see his argument. Dana White was a little bit coy about that after the fight, a little bit reticent. Like, nah, I don't know. I don't know how much I want to see him, move up to heavyweight. There's really only like 2 fights for him left at light heavyweight. The big one for Pereira is Magomed Ankalaev. Because Ankalaev should wrestle him. And Pereira has not fought a real dedicated wrestler. Blachowicz tried a lot. That's the closest he's come. It was sort of how Blachowicz fought him. And he's gotten better since then. But Ankalaev would be kind of the last stand at light heavyweight. And Ankalaev has a boatload of tendencies that Pereira has proven he can take advantage of. Like, I think they released some early odds for that, and they were favoring Ankalaev by like 2-1. Guys, you are asking to get taken to the woodshed if you make Pereira the underdog against Ankalaev. I'm not saying Ankalaev can't win that fight. I don't. He can. He absolutely could win that fight. It's not impossible. It's just unlikely, and that's trouble you don't need. If you're an odds maker, that is trouble you do not need. But Pereira hasn't taken a traditional path. Normally you come in, you fight up through the ranks a little bit. He kind of did at middleweight, but he jumped over a lot of guys who might have given him problems at different points in his development to fight for the belt because history with Adesanya. And then light heavyweight is just not a good division at the moment. I don't think that's unfair. It's not a good division. And he kind of swooped in and took a lot of the momentum he'd built beating Adesanya and then even losing to Adesanya. Like, he did not come off poorly in that loss. Yeah, he got knocked out, but it's MMA. We don't hold... I saw someone do because Devin Haney, in the world of boxing, right? Devin Haney had a loss to Ryan Garcia. That got changed to a no contest, but he got kind of worked over especially down the stretch in that fight. And the narrative coming out of that, if you all you looked at was people disliking Haney afterwards, was, oh boy, once again boxing, one loss and you're a scrub. Whereas in MMA, you've got, Charles Oliveira, who had almost double-digit losses before he went on his title run, or, BJ Penn, or Randy Couture. Both of them have very up and down records. Um, well, just any number of guys. And MMA fans will just embrace these people with losses. Like, wins and losses in MMA on paper as a number aren't nearly as impactful as it is in boxing for a variety of reasons. This somewhat ignores the fact that people turned on Haney not because he lost, but because of how he lost and how he behaved afterwards. That's really what did him in. If he'd lost a competitive fight, no one would have cared. But he fell apart against a fairly one-dimensional boxer. And Ryan Garcia is not a scrub. There's a bunch of people who don't like him, and I get why, and he is not my favorite boxer by any stretch of the imagination. But he's not a bum. He's just... He's not all that difficult to figure out on paper, and he shouldn't be that difficult to beat in practice if you're a very good boxer. Devin Haney was making noise about how he wanted to be, he's one of the pound-for-pound guys, blah, blah, blah. Dude, I don't care who you're fighting. If you're supposed to be a pound-for-pound guy, you should never lose like that. And by the way, that applies to Errol Spence as well, who I have a very high degree of respect for. But when he got just outclassed in a way that is almost difficult to believe by Bud Crawford, if you're a pound-for-pound boxer, you might lose a few fights. You should never get dog-walked like that. And Devin Haney got smashed up. Didn't get stopped, but he got dropped multiple times by a guy who he should, if he was anything approximating what he was saying, should not have happened. But back on point, Pereira came off okay out of that loss. In fact, if you go back and listen to that press conference afterwards, Izzy is talking about Pereira. He says, I don't think he's going anywhere. I think he's probably going to go up to 205 and cause problems there. And good luck dealing with him. Not wrong, man. Not wrong at all. Pereira just... I don't want to steal too much of this, but Luke Thomas described him as MMA's like big game hunter. He comes into the sport, gets an expedited path to the belt to fight a guy who's make no mistake about Adesanya at that time, one of the more popular fighters in the sport, and not the most. But Izzy draws reactions, kind of draws a crowd. I'm left to see how he does coming back, but his fight with Drakus and whatnot. But in general, like Izzy's not a nobody. He's a pretty big deal, and he beats him, and then he loses to him, and then he immediately goes up and fights a former champion. And Jan Blachowicz is not the most beloved figure, but a former champion who beat Dominic Reyes, stopped him, beat Adesanya. He'd been around for a while, well known, and beats him. And then he fights Yuri Prochazka, former champion, a guy who is as goofy in a lot of respects, but turned in one of the fights of the year when he fought Glover Teixeira. That's one of the best light heavyweight title fights ever. It's probably the best if you want momentum swings. It's wild, it's nonstop, it's crazy. Late finish from Prochazka that he might have needed. I forget what the scorecards were, but just great. A guy that endeared himself with a funky, violence-oriented style, and Pereira beats him. And then Jamal Hill, who had annoyed a lot of people, former champion, but whose online persona, whose persona, right, what he puts forward to the world, had started annoying people. And then it was earlier this year, takes kind of a low blow, brushes it off, and knocks him out with a left hook. I mean, Jamal Hill's not been the same since. I'm not here to pile on the guy. I'm really not, because I don't have a giant negative opinion of Jamal Hill. I really don't. I understand that when you put yourself out there the way he does, when you're trying to build a persona to generate interest because you have to sell this whole thing, people are not going to respond to that positively. No one is universally beloved, right? No, almost no one. It's very rare, and it takes a long time for a fighter to become universally loved. And Jamal Hill not universally loved. But in the aftermath of that fight, the way he has kind of handled himself and talked about it and whatnot, he has not been endearing himself to fans, which is not the end of the world. You can make a good living being a heel. You really can. In fact, one could argue, if we're talking pro wrestling, it's easier to be a heel. It is easier to get people to dislike you than to get people to care about you and like you. It's why really great baby faces in pro wrestling are rare. It is super rare to find the guy, or girl for that matter, but the guy that everybody rallies behind in a real way. It's why most wrestling territories leaned on heel champions. It's easier to be hated. It's just easier to come in, insult people, insult the location, insult the local sports team, find someone that is moderately liked by the people who watch this, week in and week out, and beat the crap out of him, and suddenly you're hated. And maybe you're not hated like deeply and viscerally, but enough to sell tickets, right? That's easier. It's easier to be disliked than it is to get people to like you and care about you. So he might be able to lean into that, but he just has not taken that loss well, by all available evidence. And now comes in 2 weeks notice, saves International Fight Week's main event, rematches a guy who gave him a fairly tough fight the first time out for as long as it lasted, and brutally knocks him out 13 seconds into the second round after clearly, I think I gave him a 10-8 in the first. With that late knockdown, you absolutely could. Just, he is the guy, Pereira, out here finding the biggest fights possible, stepping into those fights and stepping up to the occasion. He says he wants to dabble at heavyweight. He would immediately become the second most interesting fight possible for either John Jones or Tom Aspinall. I mean, full stop. There is nothing else at heavyweight all that interesting. We're going to get Blades and Aspinall in a rematch. The UFC's still trying to put together John Jones and Stipe Miocic. You know what they might do? You make Pereira the backup for Stipe and John. Stipe in particular. If something happens to Stipe again, John Jones and Alex Pereira at heavyweight, you tell me that's not maybe the most intriguing thing you can do at heavyweight right now. I'm more interested in Tom Aspinall and John Jones personally, but Pereira, over his 2.5 years in this sport, has become, he's not the biggest star, I don't think. Sort of depends on where you want to count Conor. But he is one of them. And just listening to the reactions he's been getting, people care about that guy for good reason. He might be he among certainly the guys who are active, he is easily top three draws and attractions for the UFC right now. You could argue John, maybe. Um, Izzy, we got to see because he's going to fight Drickus. Sean Strickland actually has turned into kind of a decent draw. Not the biggest draw in the world, but a good draw. But I would say Pereira's above Strickland, uh, attention-wise. He is one of the biggest success stories they have. He is one of the best draws that they have, and he very well might be. It would not be out of line for him to take another big opportunity. That's almost all he does. He may not be here for a whole lot longer. He's going to be 37 in 7 days. Light heavyweight and heavyweight ages differently, sure. But there's a lot of miles on that guy already. And we might not have him for all that long. But man, what has he done already? What is he still doing? I can't think of too many people that have done this. That have come over from kickboxing and just stormed through a division, not through the trenches, but moved up, got the belt, lost it, shrugged it off, moved up in weight, and proceed to just take out everybody at the top of that weight class. He's beaten Jan Blachowicz, he's beaten Yuri Prochazka, he's beaten Jamal Hill. Like, Ankalaev's kind of it. And he will have beaten the guys at the top of that weight class. Man. You might not... Okay, I have not been watching MMA as long as other people. But I have been here for a while. I was aware of it for more times than I've been longer than I've been watching it, because look, when I was in like high school or whatnot, this is like very early 2000s, like 2000. I was aware of MMA, but for a lot of reasons, was not able to really watch it. So read results online, find a few clips. This is back in the video streaming wasn't all that reliable. You didn't want to go to some of the websites that might have this stuff, so clips, reports, some stuff you might rent an event from back when video rental stores were a place. They might have them. So I've been aware of it, and I can't think of for a long time. Other people have been around longer than me. I don't pretend to have been here the longest, but I have been here for a while. And I was watching it for a while before I was writing about it, and I've been writing and podcasting about it for 10 years at this point. I can't think of an analog for Alex Pereira. Not even guys who came in and immediately shocked the system. Anderson Silva came in and shocked the system in 4 fights. His UFC debut, Chris Liebman was like 5-0 in the UFC at that point. Had a dump truck for a head, and Anderson Silva made him look like a guy they pulled out of the crowd. Then wins the title in his second fight, beating Rich Franklin, a guy who a lot of people were like, no, that's the guy at middleweight. Silva carved him up, busted his nose, shattered it, tore him up in the clinch with knees. Then did the same when they fought again a little bit later. But Silva just settled. I don't mean that negatively. He just I'm champion, line him up, I'll knock him down. Whether that's a big fight or a fight nobody cares about. He was just, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And sometimes I'm going to stop somebody spectacularly. Sometimes I'm going to win a decision, and I don't care. There's guys who have been excellent. but a lot of those guys were part of the architecture. Pereira just finds big opportunities for fights and then delivers. Name a fight of his where he has not delivered. Look, I was not all that impressed with his UFC debut because he was still working on some of the MMA stuff. And he did, people joked about it on Twitter between rounds 1 and 2. So he's going to do the same thing that every striker does when they're fighting a guy who's just clinching them and grappling them in MMA. He's going to come out and try a flying knee, right? He did, and he knocked the guy out. And only got better from there. Guys don't usually get better at his age. He's basically my age. And believe me, I'm still, and look, I'm not a professional fighter. I'm still working on stuff, and ideally I'm getting better at some physical things. But this guy went fighting one of the most dangerous fighters in the division, went from a very tough fight with him to a few months later, blowing him out of the water. I'm going to echo something I heard Luke Thomas say about this because I think it's true. If you're watching MMA right now, be grateful. The churn in this sport is unlike almost any other sport that I've seen. People in football become fans of the team, and they will carry that with them for most of their life, if not all of it. Ditto basketball, whatever. Basketball, you might attach to a superstar more than a team at times, but in general, basketball churn is not. NFL, for some reason, football, both American and soccer, actually carries this weird loyalty that I'm not entirely sure how it gets engendered, but it does. And fans of that will just carry that. They will carry their team with them forever. You do get a little bit of that with hockey. You get a lot of that with hockey. If you're in a region where hockey is a big deal, you get a lot of that with hockey. Um, you'll get it with baseball. You'll absolutely get it with baseball. Um, Boxing actually does breed long-term fans. I don't think it does at the same ratio. Like if you're a fan of football, it's not 1-to-1 that all fans of football have a team that they're diehards for, but it's not too far off. Only a little bit further off than what, but what do you figure? 1 out of 5, 1 out of 4, maybe 1 out of 6 people who will watch football are diehards, something like that. I'd have to double check, but my hunch is it's something like that. Boxing doesn't get long-term fans at necessarily that same rate, but the number of people who got into boxing because of like Mike Tyson in the 80s or Ali in the 70s and stuck around is actually quite high. And they could learn from old heads about great fights from the 40s and 50s and whatnot. Like boxing has a really nice ability to pass on its history. I've talked about this in the past. MMA doesn't. I've been here for a long time. I've seen like 3 generations of fans. I was aware of MMA before The Ultimate Fighter. I did not watch, what was the first season of The Ultimate Fighter I kind of watched? I want to say it was either The Comeback or Shamrock and Ortiz. So that's 3 or 4. Which I watched because I had the time at that point in my life, and I would go over to watch Monday Night Raw. This was at a time when my professional wrestling fandom was more elevated. I'd go watch that with some family, and then I'd just stick around for the extra hour. I might even spend the night. That was at my grandparents' house. If I just wanted to be out of the house and be down there for a little bit, I would just do that. So it was just kind of a thing I did. More than like I love The Ultimate Fighter and reality TV, I don't. I've never been much of a reality TV guy. I know I'm a snob. You're covering the red light district of sporting events and combat sports. But so I saw the tough generation come in, and they were looked down on by the guys who'd been around in the Pride truthers, and you could almost call them the Pride Master Race guys if you wanted to be a little bit weird about it. I remember those guys. I do. I remember when Pride folded. That sucked. But I was there for the tough generation that came in, and Liddell was already a big deal. So I saw some of that. I saw a lot of those guys, and I saw that fall a little bit. And then I saw, Brock come in and bring in his guys. And then all the tough noobs got to look down on the guys who came in with Brock and Connor, Brock and Ronda mostly. And then the tough guys kind of fell away, the vast majority of them, around the time Connor was getting big. Or a little bit, as he was ascending, not when he was big. Because, Brock and then Ronda a little bit out. Ronda and Connor were closer together. Brock is this weird kind of bump where the UFC was kind of in need of some oomph power. So I saw the Lesnar guys, but when I started podcasting, I joined this podcast when it had kind of a panel on it. I don't think anybody that was part of that still watches the sport. Mark does on occasion, but in general, I don't think any of them still watch. They fell out. A lot of them fell out around Connor getting big. Was when they just kind of got burned out, or a little before that. And you can track this. The average MMA fan life cycle is about 3 to 5 years, if that. There seems to be a secondary burnout point at the 10-year mark that has become more evident the longer you've because I've kind of been aware watching this for a little over 20 years. And there does seem to be some of it might feel more important because it's this like the second 5-year mark, so it's another. But it seems like if there's people who stuck around through that first 5-year burnout phase, when you get to the 10-year phase, the 10-year anniversary, that's when another group who stuck around from the previous generation or so fall out. So if you're watching, there are people, understand something. In MMA, I talked about this before. It sucks at passing on its history. There's guys watching the sport right now with no appreciation for Randy Couture because the UFC doesn't like him and try to erase him. There's guys with no appreciation for Frank Shamrock. There's guys with no appreciation for... Here's a weird one. Somebody threw up, would Khabib have beat Matt Hughes if we go prime versus prime? And on the one hand, the answer is yes. Khabib would win. He has best practices at his back. He trained during a better era of the sport, has a more complete grappling game. There's a lot of reasons to pick Khabib in that fight. Matt Hughes also not the biggest welter. Matt Hughes he couldn't make lightweight, but Matt Hughes would be a small welterweight by today's standards. Just as a general matter of principle. So their size is not as separate as you might think. But there's a lot of people who just do that, who don't think about that for a second, who never saw Matt Hughes. Matt Hughes has always annoyed me. I have never been a fan of Matt Hughes. But to pretend that man at a period in time was not the dominant force at 170 pounds in the world is purely nonsense. He was. his game wouldn't translate all that well to modern MMA. That's why he fell out the way he did. But there's a bunch of people who never saw him when he was good. There's a bunch of guys who never even. There's a generation. Like, some fans came in after he was inducted into the Hall of Fame who just have no concept of who he is. There's people in like 3 years who are going to get into the sport and will, if they're lucky, be told about Alex Pereira. You're watching it live. Appreciate that. And if you're around when the next generation of fighters, when we lose a lot of the current generation of fans, and when whatever brings in the next wave does, for the love of all that's holy, don't insult them, don't demean them, show them the great stuff that you've seen. Talk to them about it. We need to pass this on because the UFC is doing a piss poor job as a steward of the sport in that respect. Sure, you can find it on Fight Pass if you want to go look it up. Probably. But they don't celebrate their history very well. They're too busy with making sure the machinery operates and the next train leaves the station on time. We need to fix the MMA fandom culture. I really believe that. And if you're watching Alex Pereira do this stuff, you might never see somebody else do that again. I can't think of an analog, man. 20 years watching this, give or take. And I can't think of somebody who's done what he's doing. Appreciate that. Pass it on. Prochazka in the aftermath has said, I need to evolve or I need to quit fighting. Not an unfair assessment. He's taken some damage, man. He's got a good chin, but watch that Rakic fight again. Rakic hit him a lot. His defense is not good. He gets by on having the ability to take a punch, but there's some guys you just can't take their punches, man. And twice that's been the case with Pereira. So I don't know what's next for Pereira, whether it's Ankalaev, whether it's a heavyweight fight. But that man is on top of the combat sports world. He really is. And bless him for it. Never saw him coming. Other people did, man. Other people looked at that guy and said, look, yeah, kickboxing, but he's training with Glover Teixeira, so he's getting good training. Pay attention to that guy. And he is that meteor, he is that comet streaking across the night sky that will only be around for one part of that you will never see again in all probability. I mean, I was alive. It was kind of a big deal actually when Hale Bop came by. In no small part, it was a big deal because there was a cult in California that all committed suicide. Was wasn't that the Heaven's Gate people? I know that was also a movie, but I think that was. Let me double check that. I want to make sure I get the name of that group right. Yeah, Heaven's Gate. I was right. Yeah, they all committed suicide when that comet came by because that's a whole other thing. I'm going to leave that alone. But I remember when that came by, and I could watch it. You could see it. I could see it very clearly in just the night sky. No binoculars, no telescope, no nothing. I also lived in a place that didn't have a lot of light pollution at the time, so it was easier. And that thing doesn't come around. That thing's orbital track is. Um, what is that thing's orbital path? Hang on. Radius discovered. Yeah. How many thousand years is that? About 2,500 years for it to orbit the sun once. And I got to watch that. So I Look, other people have, but that's the kind of thing that you see that once, and then your grandkids don't see it. Um, so just take a minute, appreciate that you're watching the combat sports equivalent of a comet that you might never see again. That's what Pereira is to MMA. So enjoy it. All right, co-main event. I already mentioned this got changed during the broadcast to Diego Lopez and Dan Ige. Diego Lopez wins a unanimous decision, 29-28 across the boards. A few things to take away here. Lopez still his grappling is quick and dynamic. He's very offensively minded with his striking. His defense is a problem. You're gonna have to be very, very good to capitalize on some of the things he does. But he does a lot of hooking. He'll go to the body, which is nice, but he does it with his head straight up on the center line. Now, Ige tagged him a few times. If you have that kind of striking offense against guys at the top of this weight class, they will tear you up. Look, Volkanovski would counter him all day long. Max Holloway would light him on fire. Ilia Topuria would send his head into the second row. There's a lot good about his game. I am not trying to be down on Diego Lopez here. But if you watch how he strikes, some patterns are emerging. And this is stuff he needs to fix. Because the guys at the top of this weight class will punish you for that relentlessly. He faded in the third round. I am not going to sit here and down him for that. He had a weird weight cut and rehydration thing, and this whole thing came together on short notice, and I'm just not going to down him too much for that. Ige has a more sedate pace of the first two rounds, I think saving himself for the third when he kind of sprints. Wins the third round, not enough to win the fight, but Ige coming in, off the street, basically. If there's some questions about how this is legal, a couple of things. One, Dan Ige had fought in Nevada in February, and Nevada will keep your medical records for part of your license as up to date for 6 months. So if he had those done in February, they would still be considered good by the commission. So some of the bureaucracy of that is actually accounted for. Second, one of the first bylaws for the Nevada State Athletic Commission is just basically, at its discretion, the commission can do what it wants. So they did. The logic in play here, partially, these are two guys close to each other in the rankings, which is true. These are two guys. Dan Ige was not pulled off of the street. He was in fight camp. Now, we're still like 3 weeks out from what would have been his fight. So, we're not at the end of that. But he was not out of fight. He was not in like tip-top fight shape, but he was not in roll off the couch and come into the... I mean, crazy stories about very early MMA, believe this or not. There was a time, and especially on smaller promotions, if somebody backstage decided they didn't want to fight, somebody fell out, the promoters would go out and just ask the audience who wants to fight. Back before it was even really known as mixed martial arts. If you go back in the day, and I know this because I was watching it, you called this NHB. You called this no holds barred fighting instead of mixed martial arts. Boy, am I dating myself with that, but that's the truth. It was just, you would call it NHB. And if you had a local promotion that did a bunch of different things, you would do like, hey, we got boxing, we got kickboxing, we got no holds barred. Or we've got NHB fighting. That was a thing. That was absolutely a thing. For a long time. And yeah, they just, okay, we had a fight fall out. Who wants to come fight? Ask the crowd. And some idiot would say, sure, and come up and probably get their butt kicked, but that was the thing. Dan Ige was not coming off of the couch after a week of pizza and ice cream. He was training. He would have been at the tail end of camp. So depending on how he trains out of Extreme Couture, so that's Eric Nixick, basically. Depending on how you want to structure that, he might have been in a downer week. The last couple of weeks, you don't want to go. You want to modulate how hard you go. So he might have been in a like recovery week, or at the end of a recovery week, ready to start another hard week, and then take the last 2 weeks for just refinement and starting your weight cut. It's usually how that goes. Gonna vary depending on camp, depending on fighter, like variables. But was not out of fight shape. He was not out of competition shape. He was not at peak, but he was not, dropped in from the rafters. So it, I'm not up in arms over how that played out. How they were just, they had to have scrambled to make that happen. Solid enough win for Lopez. He said, I want to fight in the Sphere after this. They'll probably give him that. Dana White said he would. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean anything because Dana White's word is worth nothing if it's not backed up by contractual mandates. But the UFC does, as a general rule, like to reward people who do business, who do a solid for them. Not always, but they will. And Lopez did not have to do a bunch of the stuff he did to make sure that he stayed on this card and nothing kind of fell apart. So this was an okay fight, not a lot here. Lopez, first couple of rounds, more aggressive, gets a few good grappling exchanges going. Third round, he fades. Ige starts cracking him, gets on top, and wins the round from being in Lopez's guard, but I don't know. I don't know if he had a shot at stopping him on the feet. He might have, but it played out how it played out. It was all right. More for like the historicity of it, because I don't think the UFC has gotten a substitution for a fight that's fallen out as the event's going on. Not since like tournament days. We just had somebody in the back who was like ready to go, or had already fought once, and sorry, it's been a while. It's been a while since that's happened in the UFC, so yeah, there was that. Next up, this fight sucked. Roman Dolidze beats Anthony Smith unanimous decision, 229-28 into 30-27. This fight sucked. Dolidze just did a little bit more than Smith. I think I gave him all 3 rounds. What was the round you could give Smith? You could give Smith the third, I think. But this fight sucked. It just sucked. Not the worst fight on this card, but this fight sucked. Women's bantamweight up next. This was an okay fight, actually, for as long as it lasted. Macy Chasson defeats Mayra Buena Silva. Doctor stoppage due to a cut. 158 of the second round. Buena Silva wins the first round. A lot of just raw aggression, striking combinations. Both women willing to throw crap in the clinch. Good for them. They didn't do a lot of like Greco clinching. They did a lot of let's each grab a collar tie, kind of hockey fight it out. So not boring, certainly. Second round, Buena Silva starts fading a little bit. She does not fight at a sustainable pace. I think that's fair to say after watching several of her fights now. The way she fights in the first is not the way she can't fight that way for 15 minutes or 25. Like she's got to figure out a way to modulate that. But she fades a little bit. Chasson works okay in the clinch, winds up getting a takedown, gets on top, lands a left elbow that opens up the cut that ultimately stops the fight, fights off an armbar, they get back up, referee says time, want the doctor to look at that. It's over the right eyebrow, and it's a fairly long cut, and it's deep. Which is really the problem, is how deep it was. No issues with this fight being stopped for that cut. I have no... Commentary was a little bit miffed. Joe Rogan's like, it's just blood. Which, kind of important. I get what he's saying, but still, blood kind of important. He changed his tune after he got in the cage. So he went in, he interviewed Chasson. Apparently, he got a better look at Bueno Silva's cut up close, and when he came back, sat down back at the broadcast booth, he was not complaining about that stoppage. Look, I understand that MMA does allow a lot of fights with cuts to go on. In some cases, they shouldn't. Um, I mean, there was the joke that got floated like, "Oh, Gregory Rodriguez was told they stopped a fight for a cut." It's a picture of him with that like visor opened up between his eyes. People forget how that went. Like that cut opened up. He got up from under Chidi Njokuani, got after him, and put him down very quickly. Had the referee called a pause after that stand-up to get that cut looked at, I think they would have stopped that fight. I might be misremembering. There's almost no way they like looked at that cut between rounds and then let it continue. But he was, and I don't know why the referee in that fight didn't call a halt to have that cut looked at, but Rodriguez knew like I can't let him. So he got right after Njokuani, got him against the fence, made sure there was no break for the referee to like, hey, wait a minute, that's a bad cut. Until he was stopping the fight because that would have been a fight-ending cut. I've this was almost down to the skull, man. Like, if you have a surface cut that's there and it immediately swells and it's not that deep, then okay, whatever. This was a bad cut. Not actually the worst cut in combat sports that weekend, though. There was one at PFL 6. Brendan Loughnane opened up. Who the heck did he fight? Let me check. He fought. Was it the PFL? I can't. I want to say Hernandez. Where's my list? Gonzalez, Justin Gonzalez, and you can find that one. You can find images of that cut if you're so inclined. It's bad. I actually first saw that because I didn't watch the fight, but it got posted by I think like the backstage doctor or something when he was about to stitch it up. It was like, yeah, normal. What's the worst cut you saw today? And it's this giant cut in the middle of his forehead that's pretty much down to the skull. Uh, yeah, it's not good. It's a bad cut. That was the worst cut in combat sports. This was that one, but Buena Silva, that one opened up on her, would be number 2, so no issues with that. I don't care what happens in this weight class. They announced, we know the next title fight. I'll talk about that in the news section. That division is just a wasteland. It just is. There has not been an influx of talent. And kicking off the main card, this is how you knew it wasn't going to be great. It got off to a bad start. Ian Machado Gary defeated Michael Page via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the boards. I actually, doing it live, scored this for Page. I still think you could make that argument, but having slept on it, Gary getting the third is probably more correct. So first round, Gary not getting the better of the striking, not surprising, gets a takedown, gets the back, and spends the round on the back looking for the choke. Can't find it, but clear round. Second round, Gary cannot get anything approximating a takedown, gets hit over and over and over again. Gary's striking defense is a little iffy, turns out. He's not great about eliciting reactions. He's pretty good about countering, but only when you give him the opening. And he's not proactive about his openings. Really good fighters make you make mistakes. Gary will capitalize on your mistake, but if you don't hand it to him, frequently on a silver platter, he doesn't make you give it to him. So he kind of got hit a lot by MVP. Third round, Page lands a couple of good punches. He gets Gary rolls for like a leg. Not even rolls for it, like drops for it. They're against the fence in a clinch. He's sort of thinking about a level change, can't get it, so he just sits back for like an Achilles lock. Can't even really get the Achilles position tied up. MVP winds up spinning around, getting on top, doesn't do a whole lot from the guard. Gary eventually regains his feet, gets the back, gets kind of a backpack position. MVP is quad potted up and bent over, but not trying to really shake Gary off, so Gary's just like hanging out on his back. Some poor decision making from Page there. Gary gets the third round, I guess. Fight was not good. Wasn't terrible, but wasn't good. Um, Gary's as Gary's level of competition has increased, his performances have not. This was not a strong showing from him. I don't think he did all that well against Jeff Neal. I didn't have a big issue with him winning that fight, but some of the cracks in his game are becoming more and more apparent. He's calling out Shavkat Rakhmonov, and you are not ready for that one, man. Rakhmonov would do bad things to him. I appreciate his ambition. I want to be world champion soon. Fair enough, but there's just a lot about his game that is not being refined, and it feels like he's not always taking the right lessons. Some people can take the right lessons from a victory that was very hard. One of my go-to examples for this, Khabib Nurmagomedov, when he beat Gleison Tibau, you could argue he should have lost that fight. In fact, when I was watching it live, I thought he did, first time. Subsequent viewings have become more sympathetic to scoring it for Khabib, but that was a very hard fight for him. Tibau stopped the vast majority of what he likes to do, and he didn't really have a backup plan. The only thing that really cost Tibau that fight is Tibau's lack of meaningful offense. But he stopped almost everything Khabib at that point in his career was trying to do. Khabib took the right lessons from that win. Here's where it was hard. Here's why it was hard. Here's how we fix it. Some people can do that. Some fighters and their coaches can do that. Some guys have to learn the hard way. Gary might be one of those guys who is just going to take the assumption that if it's not broke, I'm not going to fix it. When it's rattling and if it breaks, it's going to cause a lot of problems. So that was your main card. Not a great main card. Really, notable main event. Great performance in the main event from Pereira, but the rest of it was forgettable as a general rule. Prelims, I'll try to be fast with these. Joe Pyfer knocks out Marc-Andre Barrio, 125 for the first. Pyfer just walked him down, punched him out. A hard-hitting guy against a guy without great defense. Yeah. Andre Fili defeated Cub Swanson via split decision, 29-28. I thought Swanson won this fight. I'm not up in arms over it. I think 29-28 either way is defensible. But I thought Swanson had that one. John Silva missed weight and then knocked out Charles Jourdain in the second round, 122 of the second. Nice finish, actually, from Silva. Jourdain was really struggling with him. Silva got his measure relatively quickly and is kind of a tank. Started hitting him, fought off a couple of takedowns. The one that ended it, Jourdain reaches for a single leg, gets kind of a single leg. Silva, left hand on the head, shoves it down. Limp legs free, keeps his left hand on the head now as a frame instead of just a post or a lever mechanism to push the head down. Measures with it, right uppercut, drops Jourdain. All she wrote, basically. That's one I probably should have got right. After the weight miss, and just in general, I probably should have got that one right. Silva kind of explained the weight miss after the fact. Apparently, during his weight cut, he went off to do something on his own and fell down a flight of stairs. This is his story. And maybe not a full flight, but like fell down some stairs. And banged up something. I think he said elbow. And was told by team and the doctor that they got over to look at it Oh, you don't have to pull out of the fight, but don't do anything. You might exacerbate whatever happened there. Um, that does not speak well of his decision-making capabilities. If you've never been around someone cutting weight, by the way, um, you're dehydrated. You don't make good decisions, and you're a little. Even if your mental acuity is mostly okay, your understanding of your own physical capabilities is not. You never let someone who's cutting weight do anything or go anywhere alone. You just don't. So poor decision making by him and the people around him, if we're being honest. Assuming that's the truth, I'm gonna caveat there. If that's what actually happened, poor decision making by a lot of people. But I've got kind of everybody gets one rule about missing weight. If it's not a problem going forward, random things happen. And if they happen to happen during your weight cut, you might miss. So keep an eye on it, but see how that happens. See how that plays going forward. Peyton Talbot ran over Giannis Gamori 19 seconds. Nice little timing on a 1-2. Throws the jab, waits half a beat. Gamori then throws a leg kick. You should not be kicking in punching range as a general rule. But there's enough of a delay on the 2 following the jab that Gamori thought maybe, he's backing out, maybe there's nothing else coming, so if he's heavy on the leg after the jab, land a leg kick. Instead, his timing gets split, right hand down the pipe, floors Gamori. There's a lot to like about Talbot's game right now. Have to see how it develops, but there's a fair amount athletic, good power, fairly dynamic in some of his, again, the athleticism is really kind of what stands out. Good power, but moves very well, moves like an athlete. Some guys who are fighters are not great athletes. Some good athleticism in Peyton Talbot. Lot of room to develop, still kind of green, but looks to have a promising upside. On the early prelims, Jillian Robertson defeated Michelle Watterson Gomez via unanimous decision, 230-27 to 30-26. Shame on these judges. I was 30-25. I gave Robertson 10-8s in rounds 2 and 3. You could have given her a 10-8 first. That's how bad this was. Total domination from Robertson, pretty much start to finish. Michelle Watterson retired after the fight, which is probably due. She's almost 40. And she's been fighting for a long time. I remember when she was kind of starting to make a name for herself originally. She took time off because she got pregnant. And she actually had a fair amount of momentum building up before that. You guys may not remember this. Some of you may not have been around in the sport, but women's MMA used to be a free-for-all. If you don't understand, so Invicta, the all-female fights promotion, Invicta exists because women's MMA was broken and needed to be fixed. There were no weight classes. They used to fight 3-minute rounds. It was, hey, this is a catchweight fight. You two, you're about the same size, even if you're not. You weigh what? You weigh what? Fine, go fight. Roxanne Modafferi has a million stories like this as well because she was around forever. If you get a chance to talk with, she's a professional wrestler now, but if you talk with Shayna Baszler, she'll talk about some of this stuff too. Because she was around back when it was just the wild, wild west. Michelle Watterson was around back then. And she fought like before Invicta formed, and Invicta formed to try and correct the perception and execution of women's MMA. And she fought out of her natural weight class for her entire time in the UFC. That woman is a natural atom weight. That's 105 pounds. And she fought at 115 and 125 in the UFC. Never became a champion in the UFC. But they put together a fairly nice video package for her, and which, if you've been around for a long time, was kind of nice to see. So good on her. I have a lot of respect for her career. and her tenacity, even if I've clowned on some of her individual performances, and the fact that a lot of her striking offense is aimed like 4 to 6 inches in front of her opponent. At heavyweight, another guy who wound up leaving. Martin Bidet defeats Andrei Arlovsky via split decision, a 29-28 each way and a 30-27 for Bidet. This fight sucked. Andrei Arlovsky apparently was cut by the UFC after this loss, or this was the last fight in his contract. Did not get a send-off package. I don't know if he did not announce. Michelle Watterson seemed to have told, if you get together a video package like that, you told people this was your last fight. So Arlovsky apparently did not, but Arlovsky's career is weird, man. Burst onto the scene early, became UFC heavyweight champion, lost it, then had one of the worst title fights you'll ever see with Tim Sylvia. Look, I'm more than willing to acknowledge that, like, the second title fight between Rose Namajunas and Carla Esparza is one of the worst title fights in UFC history. It's up there with, like, that. If you've never seen Arlovsky Sylvia 3, watch their other two fights, by the way. Those two are actually pretty good. That third fight is awful. It is just awful. He wound up leaving the UFC. Fought in Strikeforce. Went on this, fought in both Affliction and Strikeforce, actually, and then went on this weird run where he was, like, getting knocked out regularly. But that was 10 years ago. Because I was one of those guys saying he should retire. All right, let me go back to that stretch. So, yeah, no, geez, it's longer than that. Okay, there was a stretch that was longer than that ago. So, like, 09 to 11. So you get 2011 when Sergey Kharitonov knocks him out. So gets knocked out by Fedor, knocked out by Brett Rogers, loses a wide decision to Antonio Bigfoot Silva. Then Sergey Kharitonov knocks him out in Strikeforce. That was one of the last Strikeforce cards. I think it was. After that, so that 4-fight stretch, a lot of us were calling on him to retire. Because bear in mind, 2011, he'd already fought since 1999. So that's the guy already over a decade into his career. And we all kind of went, maybe you shouldn't be doing this anymore. Shuts all of us up. Goes through Pro Elite, has a one fight, fights a few times in the WSOF. Gets back to the UFC in 2014. He returns. Beats Brendan Schaub. Weird fight. Knocks out Bigfoot Silva. That was a hilarious fight. Knocks out Travis Brown. Beats Frank Mir. Then loses to Stipe fairly quickly. Then he goes on this other losing streak. Listen to this one. Stipe Miocic. This is 2016 to 2017. Loses to Stipe Miocic. He gets stopped. Alistair Overeem. Stopped. Josh Barnett. Stopped. Francis Ngannou knocked him out cold. And Marcin Tybura, of all people, dropped a decision to him in Singapore. Was that the fight? I want to say that was the fight where Tybura exits the octagon getting flipped off by Charlize Theron. Don't quote me on that one. But there's one of those fights, and I want to say it involved Arlovsky and Tybura, where this was not too long after Endeavor had bought the UFC. And Charlize Theron, apparently kind of a fan of MMA, was there for this one anyway, and was just, the fight sucked. And it's like she was flipping off Tybura as he walked out of the cage. It was hilarious. And at that point, so 17, so we're talking like, 6 years removed from the last time we all said he should retire. We're kind of like, maybe this guy shouldn't be doing this anymore. Wins a couple of fights. Goes on another losing streak, but none of those are stoppages. And then just, a little bit up and down for a while. Goes on a winning streak not that long ago. I mean, in 2022, like in 21, he loses his first fight of 21. Tom Aspinall ran him over. Oh no, Tom Aspinall. Beats Chase Sherman, Carlos Felipe, Jared Vanderohe, and Jake Collier. Like, okay, none of these are world beaters, but he's winning. And then his current 4-fight losing streak is what finally got him ousted. Gets choked out by Marcos Rogerio de Lima, TKO'd by Dontel Mays, drops a decision to Waldo Cortez Acosta, and then this one to Martin Bidet. So his second UFC run, longer than his first, actually, comes to a somewhat ignoble end. I don't know what to say about Arlovsky. Ridiculous longevity. He is 45 years old, and he was the last guy on the UFC roster, probably one of the last guys in the sport, anywhere in the sport, who had made his professional debut before 9/11. You want another wild, random statistic about Andrei Arlovsky at this point? With Andrei Arlovsky no longer being in the UFC, Stipe Miocic has not fought anyone on the current UFC roster. Nobody in Stipe's entire career is active anymore in the UFC. That is wild. That is absolutely wild. But there's your random fact there. Yeah, that fight sucked. Flyweights Ray Saruya, there we go, I got there, defeated Carlos Hernandez via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the boards. I feel like Bruce Buffer thought that his first name was Racer. If you look at how he was pronouncing it, it was like Racer Uya. Now it's Ray Saruya. This would have been my second fight of the night. The third round slowed a little bit, but the first two rounds are some wild grappling exchanges. Sarudia is really after a twister at different points in time, spends a lot of time in the truck position, which is what you're doing with your legs, basically, when you're going up. Threatened a calf slicer at one point. Some really, really fun, scrambly stuff from these two guys through the first two rounds. Third round, Hernandez smothers a belly-to-belly lateral drop attempt. Gets on top in half guard, full guard, and then just kind of, it was half guard, and just kind of hangs out there for the round. Does enough to not get stood up. Not the best ending, but really good first two rounds. Look this one up, especially if you got an eye for grappling. Fun stuff there. Would have been my second fight of the night. Sorry, I forgot to mention, Andre Fili and Cub Swanson was fight of the night. I don't take issue with that. And then kicking everything off, Vinicius Oliveira, lock dog, defeats Ricky Simone via unanimous decision. 230-27 to 29-28. Maybe you could give Simone the third. I don't think so, but maybe. Simone is 31, but he's been in the UFC for a little bit now, since 2018. He's got 26 fights. But listen to his run. So he actually choked out Murad Dvalishvili. Got a technical submission via guillotine choke at the end of the third round. Beats Montel Jackson, beats Ronnie Yaya. Then the big one that should have told y'all a little bit about his ceiling. Uriah Faber comes out of retirement and beats him via TKO. Uriah Faber had not stopped someone with punches in like a decade when he did that. Loses to Rob Font. Beats Ray Borg, beats Gaetano Perello, beats Brian Kelleher, beats Rafael Assunção, who was pretty washed at that point, beats Jack Shore. That was a good win. Then Song Yadong beats him, Mario Bautista beats him, and Vinicius Oliveira beats him. This guy is up and down. He just is. When he can actually start making his game work, he's pretty good. But it is not at all impossible to stall him in first gear, and that's what happened here. Pretty good stuff from Oliveira overall. That guy brings some violence. Worth noting. All right, that was it. That was your card. Sorry, I waxed way more poetic about that main event than I intended to. I apologize for that. Thank y'all for sticking with me. Your bonuses already mentioned Fight of the Night, Swanson and Feely, no problems. Should have had one for Saruya and Hernandez. Performances went to Alex Pereira, Macy Chasson, Joe Pfeiffer, and Peyton Talbot. Generous to give one to Chasson. That was a generous call. I would have. I mean, you weren't going to give one to Silva because he missed weight, and you don't like doing that as a general rule. Fair enough. I I would have thrown a second fight of the night at Saruya and Hernandez, but that's just me. So full report, MMAZona411mania.com. Y'all know where to find that. Give it a read. Leave a comment if you're so inclined. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to try to get through some of the rest of this quickly. We have a few general fight announcements. So the next UFC event, which is not this coming, which is not going to be the 6th of July, but will be the 13th, was supposed to be Rose Namajunas and Macy Barber. Macy Barber has withdrawn. She is dealing with some illnesses and apparently some antibiotics courses that helped contribute to wrecking her immune system a little bit. There's stuff going on with her. She's trying to get figured out. Wish her all the best. Had to pull out. In steps Tracy Cortez. This card is not very good. It's not awful. Awful would be a stretch. They're still leaning heavily on Rose Namajunas because she lives and trains in the Denver area. If something happens to her, they'll be in trouble. They'll be in real trouble. But yet another main event that fell apart for the UFC. They just can't keep any of those together to save their lives, it seems. But like the other main card fights that we have currently announced are Santiago Ponzinibbio versus Muslim Salikov, which I think will be fun. And then Gabriel Bonfim and Angelosa, which is they're trying real hard to rehab the Bonfim brothers, is really all that is, and I don't care. Other fights on the card overall, Julian Erosa and Christian Rodriguez, that'll be okay. Cody Brundage and Abdul Razak Al Hassan, don't care. Viviane Araújo and Jasmine Jasdavicius, meh. Luana Santos and Maria Agapova, who could possibly care about that if you're not related to them. And then Josh Fremd and Andre Petrosky. Petrosky, who they had some high hopes for coming out of The Ultimate Fighter and is not really panning out. But then Fremd is kind of a guy to get him back on the right track. We were supposed to get Drew Dober and Mike Davis. Davis tore his bicep. And we were supposed to get Chris Duncan and Nazim Sadikov. Duncan got replaced by Markel Medeiros. He got pulled out. That card needs help. That card needs a lot of help. And losing half of the main event, it's the less important half of the main event, but still losing half of the main event is not helpful. So that, we have our first fight announced for UFC 307. This will be the UFC's return to Salt Lake City, and they've announced one fight for it. For the Women's Bantamweight Championship, Raquel Pennington and Juliana Pena. And look, man, I live in Utah. Salt Lake is kind of a pit. I don't live there for a reason. Even I don't think that city deserves to suffer like this. I don't know how Juliana Pena went from pulling one of the most impressive and unlikely upsets, not the biggest upset statistically, because odds are very easy to track, but one of the most shocking upsets when she beat Amanda Nunes, to then losing horribly in the rematch, comically, and becoming maybe the most unlikable, annoying person in MMA, and that is a high bar to clear, by the way. She might have done it. I don't know how she did that, and no one cares about Raquel Pennington. One half of one of the one of the worst. Her and I don't call her fight with Mayra Bueno Silva the worst title fight ever in UFC history. It's not. It's one of. It's absolutely one of the worst. And there's a whole generation of I can't say this whole generation because Esparza and Namajunas was fairly recent, but it's certainly it's one of the least. It is one of the worst. Who cares? Y'all are just wait. Kayla Harrison is going to wear that belt. She just is. As long as you don't make her fight too many times at bantamweight, she's gonna get that belt. We're kind of wasting time with it. We're treading water trying to figure out, please, somebody, can we get some talent to come into this weight class? And it turns out, no, we can't for whatever reason. If they make that the main event of that card, we'll be in trouble. That is not. That is a fine enough title fight as a co-main event because you're contractually obligated to make it. As a main event, that is a terrible main event. What's the other? One of the upcoming fights, in fact, July 20th, UFC on ESPN 60. They're at the Warehouse, so we have a Warehouse main event of Amanda Lemos and Virna Jandiroba. That's a Warehouse main event. That whole card, let's have a look at that, shall we? Is this bad? It's not good. So that's your main event. Yeah. Very not compelling main event material. Middleweights, we have Brad Tavares and Junyoung Park. I love the Iron Turtle, but Brad Tavares has been in the UFC forever at this point, and I don't know. He's just furniture. Steve Garcia and Seung-Woo Choi. Steve Garcia is there to kind of make people look good. Doo-Ho Choi and Bill Algeo might be fun. It's been a minute since we've seen the Korean Superboy. Yeah, been over a year. That poor guy. He came in, had a really good run going for a long time, including like 3 really good UFC fights. Then had one of the, maybe arguably the fight of the year in 2016 against Cub Swanson, lost it. Served his military time, because in South Korea, it's 2 years military service is mandatory. Comes back, fights Jeremy Stephens, and gets stopped in the second round. Then gets stopped by Charles Jourdain in 2019. Doesn't fight again until 2023 when he goes to a draw with Kyle Nelson. That was February of last year. He has been out for a while. Yeah, I don't know how to feel about that one. We also have Cody Durden and Bruno Gustavo da Silva. Meh. Jung Yong Lee and Haider Amil. Meh. Luana Carolina and Lucia Pudilova. Who could possibly care about? No. Kurt Hollabo and Kainan Khrushchevsky. Loic Radzhabov back in action against Trey Ogden. I'm half interested in Radzhabov. Brian Kelleher and Cody Gibson. Chepe Mardaskal. Was supposed to fight Dan Ige here. Again, that's no longer on. We'll see if anything comes of that. Oh, I'm sure Muhammad Usman and Thomas Peterson will save us from the doldrums. And Miranda Maverick and Dione Barbosa. That is a phoned-in card, man. We're in the Warehouse and everybody knows it and nobody cares. So, yeah. That's kind of what we've had for fight announcements recently. Nothing really good. So, yeah. All right. Last bit of news, then I'll check Twitter and see what crazy may have happened. And if not, we'll see what's up. But we got our first look at the Sphere, because the UFC is going there in September for UFC Noche. We got to look at some of the graphics, which I don't hate. Here's the thing. Appearing across that was Riyadh Season Presents UFC Noche. Because nothing says we're going to celebrate the history of Mexican combat sports like money from the Sovereign Wealth Fund of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Apparently a lot of Mexican fans are pissed about this. None of them have reached out to me. I'm going off of what other people have said, but apparently people are pissed that the UFC waffled on this a little bit, believe it or not. Originally, it was, Dana, yeah, I love Mexican fighters, and we're going to celebrate that. And then, well, maybe, maybe not. We'll see how that goes after they'd sunk millions and millions of dollars into trying to make the Sphere work for what they're trying to do. And then apparently they're getting reimbursed for part of this by the Saudi government. And that means they said, we're sponsoring this whole event, so put our name on it. You know, I got there's a piece written for it's one of the Substacks that a lot of former like Bloody Elbow guys or other properties have gravitated towards. It's called the MMA Draw. It's a Substack, and there's a piece on there by a guy named Zach Arnold. It was published not too long ago, June 27th of 2024. If you want to write any of that information down, I'll say it again if you don't want to back the podcast up. It's called "You Are No Longer the UFC's Primary Customer." And the point that Arnold is arguing here is that TKO, which owns WWE and UFC, is not really selling its product to the fans paying tickets. They are selling events to government entities. And if you read the whole piece, and it's fairly lengthy, but there's a few things, and because he's talking about the relationship between some of these things in government and how they and fighters and all that stuff, there's a segment where he talks about how terrible, I'm paraphrasing, why it would be in the best interest of TKO for Donald Trump to win the election, because we're coming up on an election here in the United States and everything has to be about Trump and Biden and the presidential debate that just I didn't watch it. I've seen enough highlights to know that nothing good will come of this. You've got one guy clearly going through at a bare minimum sundowner syndrome. If you're familiar with sundowners, it's just cognitive cognitive ability declines a bit. Anxiety goes up during times when the sun is like going down. This is a very common thing in people with cognitive impairment and even people without major I'm not just talking like Alzheimer's or full-blown dementia. Even mild cognitive issues like little bits of general senility that kind of come towards everybody towards the end of their life. Even people who don't have that or are still somewhat cognitively there might still get some sundowners going on as they get up in age, and it's clearly happening to Joe Biden, and the man's 81. I don't actually blame him for that, but I don't think he should be running the country to the extent that he is, which has now opened up a question about, hey, if this guy's running things, what does that say about the sheer momentum of the bureaucratic state in which we live? But that's a whole other thing. And then you got Trump, who about every second or every third, give or take, point he makes is dubious at best. But everything's got to be about that now. So, of course, there's a Trump segment in the article, and I just bleh. But other thing, moving on from that, you're not here for politics. I talk about it when it's necessary. Only tangentially necessary here, but a lot of what Mr. Arnold is arguing is that the UFC is basically selling their events to, again, government agencies, be that tourism boards or what of different states here in the United States or other countries, getting giant site fees and reimbursements and whatnot, and the ticket sales and whatnot are all secondary, basically, to what they're able to get for bringing. I mean, this is what TKO is doing. They're like, hey, come here. Hey, you, state tourism board, come here for a minute. Look what we've got. you can have on Friday night a professional wrestling event that will draw in people because we announced these in advance, and WWE is selling out. They're on a string of sellouts for like television tapings and pay-per-views, and fair play to them, whatever, I don't care. Actually, I do half care. Their product is actually pretty good right now, so thumbs up because I have to cover it and I would not be watching it otherwise, but that's just me. You can have that on Friday, and then we'll do a UFC event Saturday. And maybe we'll do a house show here on Sunday, and maybe even, if we're feeling lucky and generous and you throw us enough money, we'll do a Monday Night Raw that Monday night, same location. I mean, they made a WWE, so TKO by extension, just signed a big deal with like Indiana, the state. They promised to bring a WrestleMania to, I forget which field, but there's a venue there that can support it, apparently. They're going to bring 2 nights of a WrestleMania to that, and 2 nights of SummerSlam. Apparently, that's becoming a 2-night event. God help us all. And they're getting paid by whoever owns that venue, and which is partially owned by most major venues like that, or at least partially subsidized, hence owned by the taxpayers. So they're actually represented by the administrative state, a bunch of unelected bureaucrats who are appointed by the governor to either a state athletic commission or a board of tourism or whatever they want to call it. And those people are the ones that are being lobbied by the TKO group to get lots of money to bring the circus to town. And their circus can be a bunch of different things. And that's basically what they're doing. They don't actually care as much about the ticket sales. They care about what they're getting from the government, which is basically saying what they're getting here in the United States, at least, or any government that operates on some kind of a democratic model, utilizes the democratic process, because none of them are actual democracies. Not here to talk about the civics organization or the logistics of government. But if you pay taxes and you have some kind of representative democratic system, that's your money that these people are signing over giant checks to the TKO group to bring the circus to town. That's what's going on. And if you don't pay taxes and it's just the sovereign wealth fund of the United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia or whoever, just throwing money at them, like that's kind of more the Australian Board of Tourism, like, hey, Perth, we would like to bring our shtick here. We can bring professional wrestling, we can bring WWE, and then we can bring, not too much longer after that, we'll bring the UFC here. There's Australian guys and New Zealand guys we can put on the card. Don't you want us to do this? We will bring tourism in here. We will bring people from sort of satellite areas in the region even will come in, and you can sell out hotel space, and there will be this. There was this was a few years ago. There was actually a big piece on the economic boom that WrestleMania brought to the Tampa Bay area. I forget when exactly this was, but this might have been pre-COVID. But people who pay attention to this stuff did the math. Here's all the extra stuff that was brought into this area by hosting this big event that has a worldwide fan base. You had people from all over the planet flying in. And they've got to be housed, and they've got to be fed, and they've got these other stuff to do. They go see other things, and the economic impact of something like that on any of those regions. Now, a UFC fight night, even the average pay-per-view, is certainly not WrestleMania. But a good, potentially large UFC pay-per-view is a pretty big deal. And I don't agree with every bit of what Mr. Arnold puts forth, but he does make a fairly compelling case. Go read it for yourself. I'm not going to read the whole thing. But read it for yourself. He brings up some very good points about who is the UFC's audience? Who is the primary customer for the UFC It's not you and me sitting at home watching. I'm not completely sold on, again, all of it, because he's making a point. So he says, the actual customer would be lucky to be ranked third amongst the UFC's primary concerns. That feels a bit dramatic, but there's a lot about what's been going on that I don't think he's entirely wrong. And we're going to see more of this. Was it weird to basically say the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is allowing us to celebrate Mexican culture? Yes. Yes, it was. That was weird. The UFC they have sold every bit of advertising that they can on the octagon, on the canvas for it, the prep points, blah, blah, blah. They won't let the fighters monetize their shorts, by the way, but hey, we don't want to have a garish presentation now, do we? Look at the canvas and tell me that they actually said that with a straight face. It's pathetic. But I digress. But we're going to see more of that. The UFC does, and WWE is doing a little bit of this too. They're trying to get more guaranteed revenue. I mean, a chunk of WWE is moving, Raw's moving to Netflix, here in the United States at least, like start of 25, I think. SmackDown, I think, is already on Netflix, depending on where you are in the world. For other markets, it's already there. They're looking for guaranteed revenue from their broadcast partners. ESPN gave them a lot of money for 47 or whatever events per year. And if they're also getting big site fees to bring the circus to town, you could argue those two customer entities are more important than the actual fan base. Now, if the fan base goes away, then no one pays, and yada yada yada. But it's not unfeasible to style TKO Group, and so by extension UFC and WWE, not necessarily as live entertainment providers, but as a business to business transaction. And yeah, that's kind of where we are with that. It's dystopian and a little bit terrifying. So here we are. All right. I'm still curious to see what this UFC is going to look like at the Sphere. People who have been there have said a lot of positive things about the experience, but man, does that look like a bear logistically. It's going to be weird. The UFC doesn't do things like that. They have stripped away the actual presentation of their sport. And they have for a long time. Like, you can't watch the average UFC event and tell me it's any different from any other event that the UFC has put on. Like, the only difference at this point is, like, is it in the warehouse? Is it not in the warehouse? That's it. You can't tell me that, oh, so-and-so got a great entrance. Or, no, nobody gets a great entrance. They play a song, you walk out through the crowd. Like, Dana White gets pissy if you do a dance routine. They really do, like, for as much as they want fighters to, like, build their own brands and sell themselves and claim they're just a platform, they strip away all opportunity for fighters to do that outside of a canned 90-second interview at the end of a fight. It's weird. Like, UFC could actually learn something about the pomp and presentation from the WWE, but they're not gonna. They don't wanna. But the Sphere kind of forces them to do things differently because it's not a traditional venue. So I'm actually curious to see how it's going to look. My hunch is they never go back. They're spending a lot of money on that to try and make that work. So enjoy it when it comes out because I don't know that will be a regular thing for them. All right, that's it for everything I have written down. Jeez, 2 hours. Sorry, guys. I did not expect this to take that long. All right. Let me check Twitter/X and see if anything crazy is broken. If not, we will do plugs and get out of here. Nope, nothing crazy related to MMA, at least as far as I could see. So, plugs. Last week on Damn You Hollywood, we got together and talked about the bike riders. A fairly involved panel. That was myself, Mark Radulich, Dorian Price, two of his friends, one of them Mac and Andrew. We had a good discussion. A little bit of back and forth. Some of the technical aspects of the film are very well done. There's a bit of an open question about the structure and again, kind of what they were doing there and whatnot. But go listen to the review. Good time was had. Monday, that's the day you're listening to this in all probability. We will be talking about at the moment. I think it's me, Mark, and Jason Teasley. We'll be discussing A Quiet Place Day 1. So tune in for that on Monday. It's the 4th of July weekend, so we're all kind of not doing a whole lot after that. I will be covering WWE SmackDown on Friday, which is usual for me, and then there's no UFC event on Saturday. We'll be back here next week with news and a preview of UFC on ESPN 59, the Namajunas and Cortez card. So tune in for that. Thank you all very, very much as always. I hope to see you then. Thank you for listening. It means the world to me. And I know I say that every week because it's true, but the fact that anyone out there listens to my ramblings, I'm very honored and humbled to be part of your MMA experience, be that for entertainment, education, or just a voice that puts your kids to sleep. I've known of people who have used podcasts I've been on for that in the past. Just here, put it on, something about tone, cadence, whatever, makes the small child happily fall asleep. And I will take that every day. If I make your life a little bit easier doing that, so be it. I'll take it. All right. That's it for me this week. Thank you all very much. Stay safe out there and continue to be well, be safe, and behave.